Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, the sanctimoniously notorious Robert Meyer Burnett, here with Robservations number 202. Robservations, of course, being the show about something. Good to have you here. It's another great day. Welcome to all of you imagination connoisseurs, you members of the Post Geek Singularity community. As you all know, these shows are brought to you by Lucky Tiger Men's Grooming Products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And if you go to their website at getluckytiger.com and you buy anything, when you check out, you can punch in PGS for Post Geek Singularity, and you will get 20% off your order. And by the way, Lucky Tiger is now running a giveaway. Their Tailgaters, the Lucky Tiger Tailgaters giveaway, and you can get $500 worth of tailgating goodness for the brand new upcoming football season. We're already into the preseason. I know the Seahawks lost to the Vikings last weekend, but it's preseason. It doesn't really matter. Uncle Pete's going to take the Hawks, the Jedi Knights of the Pacific Northwest, all the way this year. And to celebrate that victory, or that slow burn to victory, you can become a master tailgater if you join the Lucky Tiger tailgating giveaway. How cool is that? I think it's pretty damn cool if you ask me. But anyway, if you go to clubluckytiger.com or getluckytiger.com, you can enter that giveaway free of charge. And heck, who doesn't want to win stuff free of charge, including a grill? You can win a grill. My God, amazing. Anyway, it is the 21st, my God, of August. The 21st of August. Unbelievable. Has anything happened in the world worth talking about? I'm sure there's a lot. I mean, Donald Trump's called himself the chosen one, and he's not going to Denmark because Denmark wouldn't sell him Greenland. That happened. But that's not what we're here to talk about today, is it? I think not. Well, anyway, I think what we're going to talk about is what is the one thing everybody's been buzzing about. I don't think I've seen the internet a Twitter or Twitter a Twitter the way it's been since the news yesterday, the news that broke that there is no longer a deal between Sony and Disney to allow Spider-Man to appear in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, I was gonna go off on a rant before. I'm gonna read a letter because, as you know, I love letters. And if you want to write me letters have become a big part of the show. You do so at the website, theburnettwork.net. And all the letters that I do read on this show, for the most part, are on that website. If you want to interact with the letter writers themselves, you can go to theburnettwork.net. You can find your letters there. You can also, if you want to put up work that you've done or things that you want to share that's part of your fandom, we also have the Imagination Connoisseur Gallery. You can upload things there. But I love letters, and please keep them coming. They're coming every day now. But I figured I'd start out with this letter rather than just launch into a rant, just to have a jumping off point. This comes from longtime letter writer and longtime member of the Post Geek Singularity community, Mr. Ian Samuels. It's almost like I read a letter from Ian every day. And here's another one. Rob, entertainment news sources are getting out of hand. They present news in ways that cause people to spam the news all over chats on YouTube channels and other places on the internet. Disney and Sony fall out. Spider-Man leaves the MCU. This pretty much non-story led to a tirade even in the chat on your stream for episode 201 of Robservations. The fact is, Disney has laid out plans for Phase 4 of the MCU, including films and TV series that will be launched on their streaming site, Disney+. Phase 4 does not include Spider-Man anywhere in it, so there was no need for Disney to continue in a deal with Sony for a character they are not going to use. So this is not huge news, but entertainment news services who don't seem to have better things to do to turn it into apparent news. If Disney has Spider-Man in Phase 5, they will renegotiate a deal with Sony, but until then, there is no need. Rich businesses like Disney continue to be rich and grow in their richness by being smart. It would not be smart to still be in a deal where they continue to pay Sony for a character they are not using. That's all for now, Ian Samuels. Well, let me tell you, Ian, that's actually a good point. A good point. You have made a good point there. There are currently, as announced, no plans for at least a Disney Spider-Man movie in phase 4 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, at least through 2020 and 2021. However, let's all remember the Spider-Man movies, both Homecoming and Far From Home, are not Disney films. They are Sony films. They are made by Sony. They're released by Sony. Admittedly, Spider-Man did appear in Civil War. He did appear in Avengers Endgame and in Avengers Infinity War before that. So Spider-Man appeared in 3 MCU movies and 2 Sony Spider-Man films that are MCU adjacent. That's an important thing to remember. So let's recap what has happened in the last 24 hours. Breaking news on episode 201 of this show. Spider-Man is apparently out of the MCU. Now let's go back in time. Back in the 90s, Marvel was not doing so well. So what Marvel was trying to do was raise cash, keep up their cash flow by selling the rights to other characters to make money. Now, famously, I believe it was in 1999, but Canon Films was going to make a Spider-Man movie. At one point, Toby Hooper of Texas Chainsaw and Poltergeist fame was going to direct it. Then James Cameron was going to make a Spider-Man movie. But then eventually in 99, Sony acquired the rights to Spider-Man, just like Fox. Before that, Lawrence Schuler Donner had acquired the rights to the X-Men franchise, and Fox also acquired Daredevil and Fantastic Four to their stable. Now, what does this mean? How does it work? Does it mean that they own the characters lock, stock, and barrel? No, because clearly X-Men comics are still being published by Marvel. So are Spider-Man comics, Daredevil, Fantastic Four. Well, they're not publishing Fantastic Four comics. They're coming back. But so how that works for all of you people who are interested in knowing, how does it work? When you have a property that Hollywood is going to adapt, whether it's a novel, whether it's a news magazine story, whether it's a printed magazine story, whatever it is, whatever you want to acquire to make a movie, you have to acquire the rights. Now, that doesn't mean, like, when you go and buy a book, for the most part, you don't buy the entire book outright. It doesn't mean the author doesn't own it. What you do is you acquire the rights to do something specific with that property from the owner of the original underlying IP. So if you buy, say, Spider-Man, what you are doing is you are buying from Marvel the rights to produce, let's say, a movie. Maybe you're acquiring the rights to make a television show, like, say, with Cloak and Dagger. But you are acquiring the rights to do whatever it is you're acquiring the rights to do. And usually how that process works is it begins with an option. And an option means you are acquiring an option to buy the rights. You are securing the rights. So if you're going to, say, get an option on Spider-Man, Sony says, we would like to buy, say, an 18-month option on Spider-Man. And they will pay a prearranged price for the option. It could be $1. It could be $100,000. It could be $1 million. It doesn't matter. Usually option fees are smaller, and you have you lay out the terms of the deal. It's not usually what's called a long form agreement, although some options are very long form. But the option explains exactly what you will be purchasing if you choose to exercise the option. So if you buy an option on, say, Spider-Man for 18 months, it means for 18 months, you have the exclusive rights to shop Spider-Man to other people or to raise the money yourself, and you can then go make a Spider-Man movie. Now, the option allows you to firm up. No one can do anything with the rights to the film rights or the TV rights, whatever rights you're buying. No one can do anything. Spider-Man is yours for that option period. Now, in that option period, if you want to exercise the option, then you move forward and you purchase those rights. So whatever was laid out in your option agreement, then you buy the agreement, then you buy the rights to whatever it is. And in the case of Sony, they bought the rights to make Spider-Man movies. Now, in a long-form agreement, you define what that entails. Does it allow you to make animated movies? How many movies are you going to be allowed to make? There's bumps in the deal. If you make one movie, you owe the rights owners this much. If you make a second film, what happens with sequels? All of those things wind up in whatever deal it is that you've made. You've got your option, and a lot of that is detailed. And then with the purchase, usually it's detailed even further. So that's what happens. Now, you're not buying Spider-Man outright. Sony doesn't own Spider-Man lock, stock, and barrel. What they own is the rights to make Spider-Man movies. And usually, within these agreements, there is limits. For instance, in the Lord of the Rings deal, where Amazon paid $250 million to purchase the rights to Lord of the Rings. But their agreement says it has to be about the second age. It has to be made in a certain amount of time from the time you purchase the option, or it reverts back to them. There's all reversionary clauses, all kinds of craziness. But all you need to know, and what, by the way, kids, if you're buying the rights to something, if you're going to first get an option, say you want to take your hand at adapting a book. I have optioned a few books in my lifetime where I option a book. I will pay money to the author. Then I will adapt his book. The books that I've tried to do so far have not come to fruition, although I am still trying. When you purchase the rights, all of those things, when you exercise your option and you purchase the rights, there's a lot of stuff that's going on. And if you end up not making, even though you've bought the rights to make movies, there's usually some kind of a reversionary clause that says, if you don't make a movie or a television show or whatever in this particular amount of time, then the rights revert back to the original owner and you lose your purchase price. That's usually what happens. So it always behooves a film company to continue to make whatever it is that they've bought the option on, or whatever the rights they've purchased. They get the option first, whatever the rights they've purchased. So the rights to make a movie, and then they make the film. So Sony obviously made the 3 Sam Raimi movies, and then they made the 2 movies with Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man as well. So 5 movies. So it was a pretty good deal. And then, of course, they hung on to the rights. They were going to make another Spider-Man movie, and opting with the underperformance of the second Amazing Spider-Man film, they ended up going into an agreement with Marvel, a shared agreement where Marvel, basically the terms of their agreement was Sony would release the films, but they would allow the Marvel Cinematic Universe to cross over with their Spider-Verse movies. Disney received, I guess, 5% of the first dollar gross on the box office. Now, somebody asked me on Twitter what a first dollar gross means. So what happens with the money that say a movie comes out and makes $100 million. That $100 million is not pure profit. Let's say the movie costs $60 million to make. Well, that means that you have to recoup those costs. So the movie's really made $40 million. And of that $40 million, well, this is true of all the money, but of that $40 million, you only get a fraction because half of it might go to the theater owners. And then you might have other partners that help you finance the film that you might have to pay them off. All kinds of things. There's all kinds of, everybody's got their hands in how much money a movie makes. Well, what Marvel's deal was with Sony is they had a 5% first dollar. They were getting gross money, which means that they don't have to wait for everyone else to get their beak wet or get money back. They don't have to wait for Sony's investment to be recouped. They got 5% of all of the money that that Sony was making off Spider-Man. So Marvel got a 5%, not doing a very good job, 5% first dollar gross, which means of that $100 million a movie would earn, Marvel would then get $5 million right off the bat. before anybody gets repaid, before Sony is recouped, before they get back their expenses that they spent making the money. Marvel gets $5 million right off the top, first dollar gross. They also retained the merchandising rights to the character. They could still publish Marvel comics, that kind of a thing. Now, what is the benefit of that deal? Marvel doesn't make a lot of money from a Spider-Man movie, but they can put Spider-Man into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and whatever monies they make on those movies are theirs. So on Civil War, on Endgame, on Infinity War, Spider-Man is in those movies. Marvel gets to keep everything. But then again, Sony gets to keep, well, 95% of what they were making. Of course, they don't keep 95%. Everybody takes a piece. So that's the deal. That, in a nutshell, that's the simplistic answer to what was going on. Now, what's great about that is that worked out for everyone. Marvel got to use Spider-Man. Sony got to use, well, they get to make their Spider-Man movies with the help. They got to use Kevin Feige, and they got to use the Marvel Brain Trust, and they got to use characters from the MCU as well. They just didn't have any ownership over those characters. Now, here's what's interesting. This deal that Marvel made with Sony only applied to Spider-Man. It did not, and any characters that they negotiated, probably Aunt May was a part of that deal, Uncle Ben, maybe. But for the most part, this deal only applied to Spider-Man and the characters that are in direct proximity to him. What Sony retained and what Marvel didn't have any rights to is all of the other characters. Apparently, there's 900 characters that are part of the Spider-Man rights. 900. Now, a lot of them are bit players, but that does include all of the Spider-Man rogues gallery of villains, such as Venom, such as people like the Rhino, such as, of course, Kraven the Hunter, Morbius the living vampire. All of those characters are part of the greater Spider-Man universe, and Sony retained the rights to all of those. Those characters were not a part of the deal that Sony had made with Marvel. So, what happened here, what everybody is mad about, is Marvel, after a very fruitful association, both sides got what they want. Marvel very effectively was allowed to use Spider-Man in the MCU. Sony, in turn, got the boost that Spider-Man being in the MCU gave to their own Spider-Man movies. For instance, Spider-Man Homecoming and Spider-Man Far From Home. So those are movies that Sony owned, aside from that 5%, and they were able to distribute. So they benefited by having people like Happy Hogan in the film, Iron Man in Homecoming, famously. They were able to use other MCU characters. Now, Sony has no claim to those characters. They don't own any of the characters from the MCU, but they were able to utilize them because they had a deal with Marvel. It was a very sweet deal. It worked really well. They also got to use Kevin Feige to oversee their Spider-Man movies. And their Spider-Man films, lest we not forget, Sony Spider-Man movies were pretty successful. I mean, they did between 700 and little less than $1 billion, but they even the ones with Andrew Garfield might have underperformed. They were very expensive to make. I personally was witness to a phone call where producer Gil Adler, who was producing Superman Returns, I was sitting in his office on what's called now The Lot, that's right off Melrose Avenue. Pardon me, not Melrose, but I think Melrose. No, what? I forget. Franklin? I forget. What road? What road's The Lot on? Maybe it is Melrose. It's right next to Formosa Cafe. Anyway, that's where Superman Returns. They had their post-production offices there. They were based there. Gil Adler got a phone call about coming on board and producing Spider-Man 3. And he literally picks up the phone. He's like, huh? What? $300 million? That's too much. That's how so Spider-Man 3, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3, was a $300 million movie. So Sony was spending a lot of money on their Spider-Man films. And of course, when you spend that much money, it's the law of diminishing returns because you're only making so much. But anyway, Sony's done okay with the Spider-Man movies. I'm sure they made 5 feature films. Into the Spider-Verse won them an Oscar. But admittedly, the relationship they've had with Marvel since 2016 has been a fruitful one. Spider-Man Far From Home has just become the most successful film Sony has ever released. It's made over $1.1 billion, outgrossing the previous earner, Skyfall. So everybody's very happy with that arrangement. However, it is no surprise and no secret that Sony's involvement using Spider-Man in the MCU has bolstered the presence of Spider-Man in moviegoers' minds. Everyone loves Tom Holland as Spider-Man, and this was something that on Kevin Feige's watch, they cast Tom Holland as Spider-Man. He was instrumental in the success. Marvel was instrumental in the success of both Homecoming and Far From Home. The fact that these movies were in the MCU, the value of that cannot be diminished. So don't take away anything from the Marvel Cinematic Universe or Disney itself. They had something to offer. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is the most successful franchise of all time, with an average earning of $1 billion per film if you average out the entire gross of all 23 movies. Actually, you can't include Far From Home and Homecoming into the gross of Disney, but you can include them in the gross of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That's splitting hairs, I know, but you can. So if you look at all 23 films, when averaged out, have grossed over $1 billion each, which is incredible. So there is no doubt that the arrangement between Sony and Marvel was mutually beneficial to both parties. A movie like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, while it wasn't a huge box office bonanza, terrific film, won an Oscar, very respectable movie, and that was done completely on Sony's watch, outside of the purview of Kevin Feige in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So, what happened? I'm sure everybody's read, everyone's got an opinion. My opinion's actually changed since I've found out more. I thought, and I still believe, that this mutually beneficial arrangement should have continued. However, with the success that Spider-Man Far From Home has had, and with the Oscar that Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse made, and let's face it, Venom made a lot more money than anybody thought. That's a lot of cheddar, over $800 million, closing in on $900 million worldwide. That's a lot of cheddar. And they've got Morbius the Living Vampire coming out. They're going to be making, I don't know if they're going to call it Morbius the Living Vampire, but it's Morbius. They've also got a Kraven the Hunter movie in the pipeline, and they're, of course, going to make more Spider-Man movies. Now, unlike what Ian Samuels said, they can make Spider-Man movies outside of the MCU. Their deal does not, at least I don't think, it doesn't limit them. If they want to make a Spider-Man movie, I'm sure the MCU has the right of first refusal or something, but they're going to fast track a Spider-Man movie. It was going to be part of Phase 5 anyway, because it'll take another 2 years to make a Spider-Man movie. So what happened was this. Disney wanted to renegotiate this deal. And what Disney wanted to do was they wanted to co-finance. They wanted to pay for half of the next Spider-Man movie. Now, what that does right off the bat is, if you're a 50-50 partner, especially when it comes to financing, that means that you're equal. Well, Sony owns Spider-Man. For better or for worse, Sony owns Spider-Man. So when you make something 50-50, you no longer have a controlling interest in your own property. Now, at first I thought, well, I wasn't thinking clearly. Why not? And what Disney wanted to do was up their 5% first dollar gross. They probably wanted to make it, I wouldn't imagine they wanted to make it 50% first dollar gross, because that doesn't make any sense, but maybe some kind of a larger percentage. But what they also wanted, and this is the key, in my mind, this is the sticking point for this whole deal. What Disney wanted was they also wanted control and some ownership, whether it's 50-50 or not. I'm not privy to the negotiations, but they wanted all of the rest of the Spider-Verse. They wanted to own a piece of Venom or Venom 2. They wanted to own a piece of, if they're going to make it Into the Spider-Verse 2. What Disney wanted was they wanted access through this deal to all of Sony's Spider-Verse properties, all 900 of those characters. Well, this was never going to happen. Spider-Man is Sony's most lucrative franchise, and they haven't had a great year. Men in Black International didn't do so well. They got Jumanji coming up. They had Ghostbusters they pinned a lot of hopes on a couple of years ago. That didn't pan out. There's no way that Sony was ever going to give up a controlling interest in their most lucrative IP. As much as I might want Spider-Man in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I got to side with Sony on this. At first, I didn't because I hadn't read the small print. I'm like, why wouldn't you want to keep this relationship going? I mean, keep Disney. Every time they make a movie, even if it's not about Spider-Man, it's helping you out because it's all part of the larger MCU. But what I didn't understand until I read it again in Deadline was part of the reason that these negotiations broke down was because Disney wanted to own all of the Spider-Verse, not just Spider-Man and the Spider-Man adjacent characters like Aunt May. There's no way Sony could have done this. Any business person worth their salt cannot give up a controlling interest in the underlying rights to a property that they own. Can't do it. You can't give away a controlling interest in your own IP. The only person I've known in my life who's ever done that in Hollywood is a producer named Danny Gold, who I worked with. I optioned the script for Agent Cody Banks. Danny Gold, Carrie David, whose documentary Breaking Their Silence is playing all over the place. Carrie David, Danny Gold, and we bought the option on Agent Cody Banks. And unbeknownst to us, fuckhead douchebag Danny Gold sold the rights, our controlling interest, didn't sell, but partnered up with Jason Alexander's company, Angel Arc. And underhandedly, unbeknownst to Carrie and I, gave away 55% of our own controlling interest in Cody Banks. So we only had 45% of the controlling interest. Why anybody would do this? Well, I know why. He was a star fucker and he wanted to keep Jason Alexander happy. But for your partners, you violated your fiduciary agreement. I won't get into that, but I could do a whole story on that. But anyway, so yes, I once worked with a guy on a movie called Agent Cody Banks that we owned, and he gave away our controlling interest in our own IP. So I know how fucking dumb and moronic that can possibly be. Anyway, that's an aside. Sony is smarter and would never do something like that. They can't. No business would. It doesn't matter whether you're working in the entertainment business, if you own the patents on, I don't know, yeast or something. No company is going to give away their controlling interest in their own IP. They can't. It doesn't matter how lucrative the deal is. Disney, if what's been reported is true, they way overstep. There's nothing they could do. Now, I understand Disney provides a hell of a lot of value, but in the case of what Sony wanted, apparently it's been reported that Sony even went back to the table and offered Marvel, or Disney, I guess, a 70-30 split. So Sony can own 70% and Disney received 30%. Even that's generous. But that was only for the Spider-Man movies. That was only the deal they have for the Spider-Man movies. They've now changed the deal a little bit. But there's no way that Sony was ever going to go, sure, we're going to give you 70-30 split on all of our Spider properties, on Kraven, on Morbius. Can't do it. Can't do it. And to even ask was absurd. I understand you don't get what you deserve, kids. You get what you negotiate, remember. So I get why they were doing that. I absolutely understand. But that was foolish to expect somebody to accept that deal. They couldn't. And they knew that. I mean, it's silly. So ultimately, at the end of the day, after reading everything I've read and understanding at least what I understand about how these deals are done. I have to side with Sony on this one, that Disney, I don't know why they expected anybody to go with this. I understand. Who wouldn't want a controlling interest in the next Venom movie? That could possibly gross $1 billion right there. You know, I have to say, you got to give it up to Sony. Nobody thought Venom would be as good as it was, or was it good? I don't know, but nobody thought Venom would earn as much as it did. No one thought that. So who knows? And I side with Sony. Yesterday I was tweeting, look, I don't think Tom Rothman fancies himself a filmmaker. There was even reports that, it was Tom Rothman who was in the edit bay making Venom what it was. Sure. I mean, I know I saw when I was working on the DVDs for both X-Men and X2, I saw a little bit about how Tom Rothman works. And, he's definitely one of those studio executives that would like to be Cecil B. DeMille, and I think considered a great filmmaker in his own right. Whether it's Cecil B. That's probably not. David O. Selznick is probably more of an example of who Tom Rothman would want to fancy himself being. And I'm sure it chafes him that Kevin Feige has become the most celebrated producer in Hollywood history, because Kevin Feige used to sort of, he came up underneath Tom Rothman, and Tom Rothman got to probably teach Kevin Feige a lot of what, when I left you, I was but the learner. Now I am the master. Literally, Kevin Feige is Darth Vader to Tom Rothman's Obi-Wan Kenobi, although I think that's just, I use that as an example because we all understand that reference. But the thing is, Kevin Feige is not an evil man, and I think he's more talented and understands these properties way more than Tom Rothman ever could. But that's just an aside. That's my own opinion. That's what I have to say. So ultimately, what has happened is a deal, and Ian points out that there is no Spider-Man film on the docket, although I'm sure it was coming down the pike immediately. And that might have even had something to do with this rift. I mean, now they're saying, we really want to work with Kevin Feige again. Sony is like, but he's too busy. That might be absolutely true. They've bitten off a lot. They've got Phase 4 with Marvel is busy. But you know what? Something tells me that my man Kevin Feige, who even has a hot toy of himself, can multitask, especially when working with a team that has already been in place. Now, director John Watts, another wrinkle. The director, John Watts, who's directed Homecoming and Far From Home, does not have a deal in place to move forward with Spider-Man movies as the director. Will he have directed a third movie like Sam Raimi and equaled Sam Raimi's Spider-Man output? We don't know. Maybe he will, but he does not have a deal in place. And if this gets even more acrimonious, I can see Disney swooping in and signing him up to direct another MCU movie. I don't know if that's going to happen. I think ultimately the smartest thing to happen here is to figure out a way to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. I think that if I was running the studio, if I was running Disney, I would say, okay, bad joke, you're not a replicant. And even though that didn't work, but I would come back and I would say, hey, look, we need to wet our beaks a little more. We got to get more money. A 70-30 split is pretty damn good. Now, I don't know, again, those are things that have been reported. Who knows? But that would mean that then Disney finances the new Spider-Man movie 30%, and probably, I don't know. I don't think a 30% first dollar gross deal makes sense, but I don't know. They would have to then assume the same kind of splits. When a movie is made, you have to pay the theater owners, you have to pay your co-financers, you've got to pay interest, all the people that get a little slice of that pie. Disney would have to then be a part of that. They wouldn't get 30% first dollar gross. But again, I can't speak to these things. I don't know what the deal anybody is making is. All I know is that it's very interesting, but I hope that at the end of the day, it was much more beneficial when Spider-Man can be shared than Sony can develop their own. I mean, if Morbius the Living Vampire doesn't work, I'm sure they're having delusions of grandeur that Morbius is going to make the same amount of money as Venom, but I got news for them. I don't think we live in a world where that's going to happen. Venom is a beloved Spider-Man character. that everybody gets. If you were a kid growing up, you knew who Venom was. I don't know if you're a kid growing up, you know who Morbius the Living Vampire is. But we'll see. I think both sides, obviously the MCU benefits greatly. Disney benefits greatly having Tom Holland as Spider-Man and being able to put Happy Hogan and other characters like Iron Man into Spider-Man movies. That's very helpful for everyone involved. And that's great for the MCU. And Sony benefits greatly by having a character like Spider-Man being able to cross over in movies like Civil War, Infinity War, and Endgame. It was a really great relationship. It worked well for everyone. But I get it. Everybody needs to make more money. Got to justify it. If you're a publicly held company, how do you tell Disney shareholders that, oh, yeah, by the way, Spider-Man Far From Home isn't really a Disney movie. It's not really a Marvel movie. It's a Sony film. And they're like, what? You only get a 5% first dollar gross on a $1 billion grossing film? Yes. Look, it's complex. And in this day and age where everybody is concerned about the next fiscal quarter, we live in very rough waters. The fact that this deal was done at all is amazing. And we should remember, kids and gentle beings and non-binary folk and all the human beings and aliens and whatever your belief system is, remember this. We got 5 movies with Tom Holland playing Spider-Man in them. 5. And if we never get an MCU film that has Spider-Man anymore, or we get Sony Spider-Man movies that never mention the MCU, remember, we do live in a world where we got 5 kick-ass Spider-Man centric, well, maybe not centric, but Spider-Man adjacent movies. I mean, his introduction in Civil War, incredible. The way he was used in Infinity War, incredible. I mean, how can you not love that? It was so brilliantly done. The relationship Spider-Man had with all those MCU characters. Obviously, he wasn't in Endgame very much, but if Infinity War is the last Spider-Man appearance where he gets to interact with all those characters in the way he did, hey, we live in a world where we got those 5 movies. Would I like to see more? Sure. Do I think they should make more together? Sure. I think it's a mistake not to do it. But anyway, that's where I'm coming from. That's the way the situation is, the way I see it. And, let's see what do you guys have to say? Like, honestly, to tell you the truth, I don't know. I really don't know. Draco Eris says, I didn't write the Age of Fire series. It's my favorite book series, and I highly recommend it. The Copper Rugard is my favorite character from that series. Okay, for anybody, so Draco Eris is a fan of, I guess, of me too. Thank you, Draco, appreciate the support. Draco is a longtime watcher of the John Campea show, and Draco, as he says, his favorite book series is the Age of Fire series. And I'll say right away, anybody who's reading books and has recommendations of great series, I'm like, bring it on. So I think we should take Draco at his word. And if you are interested in fantasy series of any kind, the Age of Fire series is Draco's favorite book series, and I'll take that one to the bank. I will look into that, sir. Cheers to you. First of all, give it up. First of all, that you're reading. I love that because I read a lot of books, and a lot of people don't read. And I thank you, first of all, for supporting the channel and supporting John's channel, but for recommending books. I love that. And Rugard the Copper is my favorite character. I would assume that's a dragon. I would imagine. Stubble McShave says, have fun playing the Star Wars role-playing game. I used to play that game. For what Stubble is referring to is I'm going to John Campea's tonight, and we're going to play the Star Wars role-playing game, and we're going to record it for a later show. I don't know how it's going to go. I've never played that game before. It should be pretty fun. And yeah, I think it's great. I look forward to it. JB Bonifacio says, storm Sony and bring Spider-Man home to the MCU is now at 5,000 members on Facebook, whatever it takes. P.S. Does anyone have an extra onesie? First of all, oh, God. This is my problem with fandom, okay? Fandom is, I wouldn't call them dumb or uneducated. I would call them, let's say, uninformed. Certainly, they're not business-minded people for the most part. You can't storm Sony. Sony owns the rights to produce Spider-Man movies. Marvel doesn't. Disney doesn't. They have no control over Spider-Man at all. Storming the gates of Sony would be like joining in on the attack of Winterfell. You would, if you decided, for whatever reason, you'd be. That's actually a bad analogy, but it's to talk about storming the gates at Sony. There's nothing that's the dumbest thing you can do. Remember, Sony has made. Remember this. Be clear about this. Sony has made 7 Spider-Man movies in live action and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, an 8th feature film that won the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. Sony has done very well by the character of Spider-Man. 3 Sam Raimi movies, the 2 Andrew Garfield films, Into the Spider-Verse, and then we have Homecoming and Far From Home. Why would you storm the gates of the studio that owns this character that you love so much? No. What you should do is encourage both sides, encourage Disney to stay in their lane and realize, come on, guys. And you should encourage that Sony goes back to the negotiating table. I mean, look, everybody wants to do this. I don't understand really why it happened. I mean, I get everybody. Look, like you said, like I've always said, it ain't show friends, it's show business. You don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. But Sony is not the problem. Sony owns Spider-Man. They're not going to give away Spider-Man. If you're going to storm the gates of Sony, they're going to hunt you down and kill you, and rightfully so, because you're attacking the people that you should be admiring for making 8 Spider-Man feature films. 8. 7 live action, 1 animated. And they won an Academy Award doing so without anyone's help in the MCU. So remember that. But fanboys and girls, you got to find these things out. Fan culture is not always the brightest culture. And I'll tell you one of the things when I was a kid that used to bother me. So if anyone knows about the space program and they understand, there was a space shuttle. We had a space shuttle program. And back in the day, in the 70s, when they were trying to figure out what they should name the first space shuttle, a bunch of Star Trek fans got together. I don't know if there was a petition. I don't know how they did it. But a bunch of Star Trek fans decided to name the first space shuttle off the assembly line the Enterprise. Here's the thing. The Space Shuttle Enterprise was never scheduled to go into space. It was only a test bed. They flew it, they launched it off the back of a 747 to see how it could fly atmospherically and land. So Star Trek fans were like, let's name the first Space Shuttle Enterprise. Okay. They named a shuttle Enterprise. It never actually made it into orbit. This is my problem. Fans, I love them. God, I am one, have been one my whole life, but you got to sometimes slow it down, sit back and let's talk about what's really going on here. Storming the gates of Sony is an ill-informed, dumb thing to do. They legitimately own the rights to make Spider-Man movies. They're not going to give them up. They're not re-releasing. They're adding 4.5 minutes to Spider-Man Far From Home, putting it in theaters. They're gonna change it out. I guess I don't know how they're gonna do it, but it's going into theaters at the end of this month. How cool is that? They're in the middle of Morbius the Living Vampire and production on that. They're going to do Venom 2. They're ramping up on that. They got Robbie Richardson shooting that movie, and they've got Andy Serkis directing that film. And as of right now, they can put Spider-Man in it. So, I don't think Sony's the problem. And when fans are going to storm anyone's gates, they got to get it right. They have to understand why they're doing it. Stubble McShave is here. Stubble McShave says Disney should want to keep Spider-Man in the MCU. They're building a Spider-Man ride in Marvel Land. That will be a huge draw. It will generate more dollars than films. Yeah, they can do that. They can still do that. But they can't try and take a deal and make it completely untenable for a company like Sony to make, and that's what they did. Disney's deal was an impossible deal for Sony to take. Koba says Sony now makes a deal with Warner Brothers Spider-Man in the DCEU. Well, Koba, that's actually an interesting notion. I don't think that can happen, but that is somewhat Interesting. I wonder. I don't think they could. I think there's something that could happen. But, Ian Samuels pointed out in his letter that there are no plans to make a Spider-Man movie right now. That is true, but that doesn't mean Spider-Man can't appear in any of these other movies the same way he appeared in Civil War. We shall see. Now, since I brought up fans, this is another letter by somebody who's been writing me almost daily, whose letters are always thoughtful and interesting. This one comes from Jeffrey Mao. Hi, Rob. I was listening to Midnight's Edge's recent videos on the recent reported losses in popularity of Star Wars among their core adult fans and the personal recollections of the Midnight's Edge guys about their first introductions to Star Wars and what has happened since. Whether or not there actually is a problem with Star Wars fandom and if there is a decrease is not for debate here. But what does raise an interesting point for discussion is Andre's hypothesis that there is an age limit to when you could have become a fan of Star Wars. If you did not become a fan of it yourself when you were a child like you and I, or were converted to fandom later by parents or friends, then it is very unlikely that you will become a fan at an older age. Also important is if you become a fan either during the original trilogy or very soon afterwards. I would tend to agree with him on this hypothesis. I think there is certainly merit as to when I think about the main Star Wars. I think there is certainly merit as to what I think about the main Star Wars YouTubers. They're all young, but importantly, they were in that prime age when the prequels were out, say anywhere from late 20s to early 30s now, which would make them 8 to 12 years old when Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace was released. This hypothesis would really be proven if there is a corresponding decrease in popularity among kids who were too young to have seen the originals, but then were too old to be captured by the magic during the prequels, say people born from 79 to 80 to 85 to 86, and also if people who were too young to have seen the prequels in the theater also tend to not be Star Wars fans. Rightly or wrongly, I tend to split Star Wars fans into two groups, either alive during the originals or not. I tend to adopt that old fart, get off my lawn attitude with these young whippersnapper Star Wars fans. They don't know what true fandom is, and that is to suffer without Star Wars. To go 16 long years between any kind of film Star Wars content, to go from a boy to a man in that time span. Waiting 3 years for another Star Wars film is nothing compared to that. After having 5 films in 5 years, hell, you're going to have 3 live-action shows between 2019 and 2022 at least. We live in a golden age now. There should be no such thing as Star Wars fatigue. I don't know where that excuse came from, at least as an excuse to explain why Solo bombed. And yes, it did, regardless of what the guy on Facebook says. Now, I'm not going to be one of those types who wants their EU expanded universe only. And if they can't have good new Star Wars stuff, then they don't want anything at all. I want Star Wars stuff because I want Star Wars to be around. I don't want it to go away. I want my grandkids to love Star Wars, but I also don't want crap. We could have had 2 Star Wars films a year for the next 10 years, whether it's the main saga in December and a standalone in May or something else. Sure, it could have worked. You could make anything work if they were good stories and marketed and sold well. You know, if Disney had done it right, they honestly could have released Avengers Infinity War and a damn good Star Wars The Last Jedi, delayed from December 2017, on the same weekend in either April or May of 2018, and they would have been neck and neck for the box office. People would have went to see one movie on Saturday and the other on Sunday, or one in the afternoon and one at night. I mean, if Disney wanted to, with the right marketing and the right hype, they could have done it. And the box office of the 2 movies added together would have surpassed anything seen before in the history of film. Sure, they would never actually do it, but they were in a position that could have worked. But somewhere along the way, it got screwed up so bad that Solo bombs, and all of a sudden there's Star Wars fatigue, and Bob Iger puts on the brakes. I think ultimately the reasons why it all happened may be linked to what Andre and Midnight's Edge are saying. And if that's true, then it does mean that franchises have a shelf life. This is something that I've always believed. I think a franchise has 10 to 15 years at the top. That gives you maybe at most 4 films. It's enough time for the main actors and the original creators to stay with the franchise before they either get bored or too old or demand too much money. If you look back through history, none of the great franchises have really stuck to that 10 or 15-year limit. They almost all have tried to keep going and overstayed their welcome, or did not leave things as they were. Indiana Jones almost had it, then had to go back. Terminator, Alien, Predator, Die Hard all went past 3 films and undoubtedly decreased significantly in quality. I would suggest that Back to the Future is the only franchise, and I hesitate to even call it a franchise, that did not overstay itself, wrapped up its story more or less completely, and has not tried to go back. I pass all of these thoughts along onto the Singularity to absorb and discuss. Thank you for your time, Jeffrey Mao. Well, Jeffrey, a great letter. I think you're absolutely correct in the sense that, here's the thing. I've said on this show that pop culture is cyclical. And I consider myself, I would say the OG fans are people that were alive when the original series. See, I'm thinking Star Trek when I'm thinking Star Wars. I should be thinking Star Wars. I was 10 when I saw Star Wars for the first time. I've told everyone I saw it on May 29th, Sunday afternoon at the UA 150 Theater. And there was nothing like Star Wars ever. Nothing even close. You can talk about, well, it was based on Flash Gordon and all that. Yes, but nothing had the verisimilitude. Nothing had nothing captured the imagination. Nothing was made anywhere remotely close to Star Wars. And to be sitting there, it didn't matter whether you were 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 or 50. I mean, unless you were Harlan Ellison and a curmudgeon. But anybody who went and saw Star Wars at the time was completely captivated and transported because nothing like that had ever been seen before. The same thing is true of Alien. The same thing was true of Superman the movie. The same thing was true of Raiders of the Lost Ark, the first Back to the Future. I mean, E.T. As entertainments, we lived through this grand time when these never before seen entertainments, even Dawn of the Dead, which was basically $1 million independent film at the time, the hells of pop and violence, the portrayal, nothing had ever been seen like that before. So we lived through a time where these franchises captured not just the imaginations of the audience, but there was a pop culture zeitgeist that they grabbed onto and indeed created. Star Wars forged a zeitgeist moment that never existed before, that couldn't have existed before because nobody had ever seen anything like it. I mean, everything, we could all say that we live in the wake of Star Wars now. And I think, remember, Star Wars came out 42 years ago. So I consider myself, I mean, Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back were two of the seminal pieces of pop culture that formed myself as an individual. Now, here's the thing. I'm not taking away Star Wars from any fans who saw it, but I think Andre is absolutely correct in that you needed to be at a certain time to grow up as a fan. Adults, look, when you're an adult, you can still love things. I mean, I still see things, but I don't love things with the devotion and innocence and purity that I did love things back when I first saw them. It's impossible because you have bills to pay, you have insurance you have to pay, you have kids. There's all kinds of life that travels on without that's part of your adult life that isn't when you're a child. You don't have to worry about the fact that you're going off. So many people are going off to college for the first time this year. I mean, when I went off to college, my life changed. I mean, I knew I was out of the nest, man. I was gone. You know, as soon as I was able to go to college, I left home. I didn't have the security blanket that home provided me for the first 18 years of my life. I left, man. I was out in the dough. And so I didn't have the time to look at my Ralph McQuarrie paintings, and I didn't have time to build models or play with my action figures the way I did when I didn't have to worry about how was I going to pay for my dorm, or how was I going to pay for my tuition, or how was I going to pay for gas to go to and from the mall from school? I mean, all of those concerns were brand new. And my fandom suddenly had to deal with the fact that, oh, I'm an adult now, and I have to do adult things. I have to act like, I mean, how am I going to buy laser discs when I have to pay rent? I mean, in my case, I was a little immature, so I would buy laser discs and not pay rent. By the way, kids, never a way to lead your life, just let me tell you. So I think it absolutely has to do with when you're a child. Your fandom, whatever it is that is part of your fandom, it absolutely begins in childhood. Now, a lot of us, aging man children like myself, have managed to hold on to it in some certain ways, turn it into part of your professional life. And what was great was we live in a world where fandom can now lead to a professional career. Whether you grew up reading comic books and you're a great artist and they inspired you to become an artist, you can now draw for comics, or you can go work for video game companies. We live in a world that was built by fandom, built by old school fandom that became, we live now, say it with me, in the post-geek singularity. It's a great place to be. It was created for fans. And we live in a world that fandom has forged. But I agree. I think a lot of the problem is, and especially with a lot of the vitriol that gets thrown around online, is there is a lack of understanding from a fan perspective of the realities of how business is done within fan spheres. The idea of Star Wars, it's such a strange thing that I Disney wants to make the best Star Wars possible. They're not making agenda-based Star Wars. They are not forcing a social justice warrior agenda down people's throats. They are not. What they're trying to do is trying to make the best Star Wars they can for the greatest amount of people because they want the world to love Star Wars. That's what they're doing. The decisions that they are making, however, are by definition, they are made based on what a corporation that owns an IP, how they have to behave, how they have to work. They have to have assurances. They have to make decisions that are based on what they've got on spreadsheets. They have to read marketing reports. They have to have all kinds of information, because when you're spending the kind of money it costs to continue to make Star Wars, they can't just willy-nilly hire, say, fanboys to come up with ideas. They can't. I mean, as much as people might want Dave Filoni to run Star Wars as opposed to someone else, Dave Filoni's never administered $100 million budgets. He's working his way up. And as a Star Wars fan, that's why in the history of genre fiction, in the history of Hollywood, Kevin Feige is the only executive, the only producer, the only fanboy who is all of those things, who has been able to parlay. And remember, he worked on 13 Marvel movies in a production capacity pre-MCU. He is the only one that has existed in the history of Hollywood. Does that mean that there haven't been other fans in positions of power? No, that's not what I'm saying. But Kevin Feige is the perfect storm. He is the perfect blend of person. Now, maybe you could say Greg Berlanti is that. I don't know as much about him, but Greg Berlanti, television has a much bigger group of people. It's a writer-producer's medium, so there's a lot more voices, whereas Kevin Feige is the David O. Selznick of the MCU, certainly, but he's somebody that really understands his position and understands what they're trying to do. There's never been anyone like him. Every franchise should have a Kevin Feige. Every franchise. Certainly Star Trek should. Certainly Star Wars should. But to have that kind of training and to already be a fanboy and to be able to become a professional, there's a reason why there is only Kevin Feige. He's the only one, because being a fan and becoming an uber professional are very difficult. And he's been able to hold on to his fandom and parlay it into amazing success in Hollywood because he also learned how to produce movies. And he cut his teeth on the same thing on the Marvel films, whether it was Ghost Rider, Elektra, Daredevil, the X-Men movies, the Sony Spider-Man movies. Kevin Feige got to see what worked, what didn't work, how a filmmaker's approach might necessarily not be the way to go, how a relationship between a studio that might not understand. I'm sure Kevin Feige had to grit his teeth and deal with notes from Fox that he wanted to punch someone's face out. But I agree. When it comes down to Star Wars fandom, I think a lot of Star Wars fandom needs to grow the fuck up, to be honest. And when I watch people spewing all this vitriol and not understanding that, well, I hate Disney Star Wars. Well, okay, I get it. What you're saying is you've removed, what you're responding to is the lack of a singular creative vision at the top. I get it. I feel exactly the same way. These franchises, corporations like Disney, need to have people like Kevin Feige and Kathleen. It's not Kathleen Kennedy's job. Her job is to facilitate, is to get visionaries what they need to make the movies that they want to make. That's her job. That's what a great producer does. It's not Kathleen Kennedy's job to read the extended universe and to know everything there is to know about all of these characters, because that's not what she does. And yet people want to pillory her for that. They shouldn't. And the fact that she's been able to get The Mandalorian running, that all these movies have been made, is a testament to her. And the fact that most of what they've done with Star Wars has been successful. And, like I said, it ain't show friends or show business. But what Andre was saying is absolutely right. Star Wars as a franchise is not eternal. I think younger kids, Star Wars used to be a rite of passage because it was the coolest thing going, especially up until a certain point. But now there's lots of other things. There are video game franchises that are far more ingrained in young people's minds than Star Wars is. Star Wars is a product of the 70s, ultimately. It's a 70s product that is carried over, and many people have grown up and have loved it. Now Star Wars has been sold, and it's a corporate product. It is never going to be the singular vision of one man ever again. And it's going to, and by the way, neither is Star Trek. The difference is, what we need to have is, you need to have people like a Kevin Feige that can run, that have a vision for these things, and they're not just taking it on as a job, because those people will never make those things work. We are lucky the MCU works because of Kevin Feige. I think all the filmmakers that are working on these films will tell you that he is a singular figure in the history of genre movie making, certainly genre media of any kind. And it's an amazing thing. Now, Star Wars, I don't think Star Wars matters to young people, anyone who's 20 or under, because they grew up with a lot of different choices. And of course, after the prequel trilogy, I mean, sure, if you came to the prequel trilogy as kids, maybe, but the problem is, I don't think, what people don't realize is that the prequel trilogy didn't work as well as the original trilogy for whatever reason. It's been debated ad infinitum. I mean, if you really want to know, watch Plinkett's reviews of the prequel movies. You'll learn more about filmmaking than you will in film school, I swear to God, in terms of at least filmmaking as far as storytelling is concerned. But, certainly the Phantom Menace did not, the prequel trilogy did not capture culture the way the original Star Wars did. The anticipation was there, but then obviously those films are what they are. And I, like I've always said, they're bad movies, but they're good Star Wars, if that makes any sense. The thing about Star Wars is, first and foremost, it's a great movie. And then it created Star Wars. Very different. But I think Andre is right. Jeffrey, your letter's great. And I totally agree with the premise that Midnight's Edge had to say, that Andre had to say. And yeah, I mean, I buy it 100%. Not Star Wars is now, there's too many other franchises, whether it's Lord of the Rings, whether it's Harry Potter, whatever your favorite video game franchise is, it's different. And again, pop culture has a shelf life, and not everybody is going to love Star Wars for what it is. Star Wars is a product of its time. It's lasted a lot longer, which is amazing, but yeah. Doshi is here. I haven't seen you in a while, Doshi. How have you been? How you feeling? Doshi says, no Disney Spider-Man, no money from me. Boycott Sony. Again, I think that's wrong-headed. Sony's brought you 8 Spider-Man movies. Why would you boycott them? They made a deal with Disney in the first place, which they didn't have to do. It's pretty amazing. Frank Gradia says, if you want some good book series, read the Alex Cross series from James Patterson and the Prey series from John Sanford. Good detective series from both writers. All right. I have a long association with the Alex Cross series. I've started reading them from the beginning. They definitely went on a trajectory like this. I thought the first Alex Cross books with like Gary Sanji, like Along Came a Spider, and of course that they made into a movie, and movies like books like Kiss the Girls and Jack and Jill, which was a favorite of mine. I thought those books were pretty great. They were pretty dense, but they got thinner and thinner, literally, in terms of the prose. The page count was probably the same, but the prose was different. But definitely the first Alex Cross books, the first 5 I quite enjoyed. And then you could read them in one sitting. I mean, not even sitting in a nice lounge chair or something. You could literally read them in one sitting on the toilet. That's how quick you could get through those books. The John Sanford Prey books, though, are pretty good. One of my favorite. I like a lot of detective books. I have to recommend the Michael Slade psycho thrillers about the Special X Division of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. I know that sounds funny, but start with Headhunter, Ghoul, Cutthroat, and Ripper. Those are incredible books. There's a lot of great the Dave Robichaux books that James Lee Burke wrote. Love all those. I mean, Detective in the Louisiana Bayou, the Robichaux books, and Heaven's Prisoners was made into a movie, and In the Electric Mist was made into a film. So there's a lot of the Andrew Vaux Burke novels. Those are great too if you want to get into that stuff. I love great detective fiction. I read a lot of it. But thanks for that. I appreciate that. Dan V900 says Sony spent over $400 million on Far From Home, which is the $160 million and the $288 million marketing campaign. Far From Home, with the 50-50 split, loses money or barely makes money, with a third going to the theaters. Great point. That's great math to make. But yep, absolutely. But remember, it would really not necessarily, Sony wouldn't make all that money back, but they'd still split the cost. So it would still cost $160 million and $288 million. They just wouldn't get back as much. But you're absolutely right. And they own it's their property. What Disney wanted essentially with the 50-50 split is to have an equal partnership with Sony. That's not how it works, man. That's not how it works. Not how it works. The Richard is here. The Richard says, by the way, the Richard has been a big supporter of mine personally and of the channel. And I want to thank the Richard for everything he does. And he says, aloha, Rob. I'm a huge Masters of the Universe He-Man fan. I've had a tabletop game on my mind for years. Now that Kevin Smith is going to continue the original series, how well do you feel the momentum will be in the next few years? Look, I think, again, He-Man is a perfect example of a property that captured a time. If you were of the right age to as I said, I bought the day that Star Trek II, the Wrath of Khan came out, I bought the first He-Man action figures, the first 6, which was He-Man, Skeletor. I want to say She-Ra was part of the first 6. Man-at-Arms. I think it was Merman and Beastman. I think those are the first 6. Yeah, so if you were of that age and He-Man hit your sweet spot, you're always going to have the nostalgia for it. And of course, Masters of the Universe came out in 87 when the He-Man franchise was waning, but the cartoon was huge. And if you were part of that sweet spot, and they've kept He-Man going, but I think the fans who saw it that first time from 82 on, those were the fans, the biggest diehard fans. And I'll tell you what, I think the He-Man cartoon had limited appeal. The original incarnation of the He-Man cartoon. I think there's a reason why they're not calling it He-Man and they're calling it Masters of the Universe. I think with what Netflix is going to be doing, I think we're going to get really a hardcore kick-ass fantasy series for the first time. I think it could re-energize the He-Man franchise and turn it into something pretty special. I mean, they've certainly done that with the action figures, whether it's Mondo figures or whether it was the Matty Collector figures that were being done, or was it Matty Collector or what was it called? I don't know the name of the classic He-Man figures. They've done a lot with the toy line, and they've catered to the collector's market, to people like us, well, not me, but a little younger than me, that grew up like the Richard with the franchise. And I think the He-Man franchise, I think Masters of the Universe is going to become a much bigger franchise, and a whole new generation of people is going to discover it. I don't know what the numbers are on the She-Ra series, but I know there was controversy over the way things were drawn, but I think they did they're going to do great stuff with that. Jordy54 says, any freelance editors want work? DM me, good rates. I'm a freelance editor. I'm editing, I'm actually, speaking of, I can't even tell you what I'm working on, but I'll DM me. But maybe you mean editors for pros, which I do not do. The Richard says, hopefully Smith's efforts will solidify the film series. I've already ordered all supplies to move forward on the game, which will have 2 versions for kids and also adults. Thank you for all that you do. Well, thank you, the Richard. Thank you for your generous support of the channel. I appreciate that. I think that's cool. I think a tabletop gaming is back in a big way. Who wouldn't want to see a He-Man game if it was done well? I think that would be pretty cool. And you know what? I'm glad somebody finally wrote in. I can talk more some Star Trek. This is from Jim Brown. Letter from Jim Brown. It says, hey, Rob, did you ever figure out what was that scene in the Star Trek Picard trailer that took place right after Picard himself looked up into the night sky? There was a quick scene featuring a sky full of stars, but there was also some other phenomenon in the middle of the scene, in the middle of the sky, reaching down toward the ground, and I could not figure out for the life of me what it was, nor can anyone else that I can see who produced a commentary on the trailer. I would just be curious to see if you found out anything about what it was all about. Thanks for any help you can provide. It's driving me nuts. To be honest, no. I haven't gone back and looked at it. I don't know what it means. It'll be interesting. I mean, I can say maybe it's, I would assume off the top of my head, not knowing anything, it's the Borg cube that's being disassembled, that's in orbit. Maybe, I don't know. But I'd have to go back and look and check it out. So, Jim B, I need to do some diligent research on that, and I think I will do that. I will do that for you. I know you've asked me once before, but I'll do it. I will do it for you. Speaking of Spider-Man, Dan Vakura wrote in a letter. Hey, Rob, I know this Spider-Man news has upset many people. However, I'm not upset, and I know that I'm in the minority. I frankly hated the post-credit scene in Spider-Man Far From Home with the spoiler alert reveal that Nick Fury was Talos. I'm glad to be rid of that in relation to Spider-Man. That was idiotic and a much better reveal where I was excited briefly thinking it was happening, and I was seeing Nick Fury be the chameleon instead. That made sense as a Spider-Man movie with a Spider-Man villain working for someone else who figured out the truth about Peter. Everything doesn't have to tie in just because it is the MCU. What is so wrong with just doing a Spider-Man movie instead of Iron Man Jr.? That's the biggest problem with the MCU version of Spider-Man and the 2 solo films for me, was where there seemed to be a fear of just letting him be Spider-Man. I find it troubling that people are blaming Sony so harshly when it is irrational to do so and are acting way too entitled. It's an unhealthy mindset that comes across as pathetic and desperate to me. They are no better than the people preaching, release the Snyder Cut. People should not be bad at Sony when it was Disney's fault with demanding a 50-50 split. That's a truly horrible deal, and Disney has the merchandising rights from a deal made in 2011, which was a mistake on Sony's part. Sony was desperate for money at the time, as laid out by the Wall Street Journal in 2017. Sony paid for the production, writing, shooting, and editing of both the MCU films, while Marvel got 5% of the profits. That was fair, even if Marvel was in charge creatively. Sony absolutely should not have made the deal proposed by Disney and just made over $600 million from the PlayStation 4 game, which is the best-selling superhero video game ever. Sony also bought Insomniac, which developed the game and will be starting developing a sequel to it soon. Phil Lord and Chris Miller signed a deal to produce Spider-Man TV shows in April, which has been ignored by most people, and they also get to continue to develop Spider-Verse films. I know the box office wasn't close compared to Far From Home, but I trust them with Spider-Man more than Kevin Feige. I did not like Venom, however. It did make $856 million worldwide and $69 million more in China than Far From Home. The track record of live-action Spider-Man films from Sony has not been great recently, but I'm hopeful that the films would get even better if Sony had taken the character back. At least it would be a Spider-Man movie. Maybe we would actually get a flashback showing Aunt May and Peter's conversation with her accepting him as Spider-Man. Thanks for promising that after Homecoming and not delivering. Feige. I guess he didn't love that issue as much as he claimed back in 2020. Oh, I get it. Okay, I see. Maybe we would get, here's what you're saying. Maybe we would actually get a flashback showing Aunt May and Peter's conversation with her accepting him as Spider-Man. Thanks for promising that after Homecoming and not delivering, Feige. There you go. I guess he didn't love that issue as much as he claimed back in 2017, or he has a bad memory. Then again, it's possible a deal happens after negotiations, even with Sony's statement about Kevin Feige. We will see. Dan V. Yes, sir, Dan V. We will see. And again, a good letter, a thoughtful letter. And by the way, I don't disagree with you. I think those are all very good points that you made. Once again, I got to give it up to you guys. The letters, the discourse, one of the great things, going into this is episode 202, but the thing that makes this channel so great for me is the great discourse I'm getting from you guys. And I really appreciate the level that you bring to this. And I'd like to think I set the tone, but you guys keep writing in really great, thoughtful letters that I quite enjoy. So thank you for that. I think that's great. Willow Yang. Hello, Willow. It's so weird. Like when I'm on the John Campea show and Willow writes in, I have to like sit there and I want to say something, but it's John's show. It's so bizarre. Like I feel like I have, again, like Willow and all of us here of the Post Geek Singularity community, we all have a relationship with Willow, at least in our own minds. And yet when I go somewhere else and Willow pops up and asks a funny question on the John Campea show, which she usually does, I can't pretend I have this relationship with her. It's so weird. But Willow Yang says, I really wish I could have seen the original Star Wars when they first came out. I do wonder if I would appreciate them a lot more if I had. I guarantee it you would. Because here's the thing. You are, I assume, you're in your early 20s. Your PhD, early, mid-20s, maybe 23, 24, 25, maybe. I don't know exactly how old you are. But if you think about that, your trilogy, I would imagine, when you saw it for the first time, because the first movie came out 18 years ago. So if you saw the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which, by the way, a fantasy trilogy had never been seen like that before, that was so successful, that was so emotional, and it really talked about sticking the landing. The Lord of the Rings trilogy, if you saw that, would have been, I think, far more relatable and emotional at the time. And there's a lot more layers. I mean, Star Wars is basically very simplistic. And for someone with your intelligence, I would imagine seeing Star Wars is like, well, that's fine. But I would think something like Lord of the Rings or even The Matrix, while the Matrix Reloaded and Revolutions obviously are, they disappointed many, but they're still really interesting. So I think, by the way, if you were around to see the Star Wars trilogy when it first came out, you wouldn't be you anymore. You wouldn't be the Willow Yang that we all know and love. So I'd like to think it's better that you are who you are now and that I got to meet you, albeit only over these chats and via your emails and letters. I'm glad you're the person you are today because of your experiences. I don't think you would have been the same Willow Yang had you grown up when I grew up. And if we were contemporaries, I think you'd be very different than you are. So don't worry. We like you the way you are now. Brandon Valenzuela says, don't cross Alex Cross. Yeah, I haven't read the latest books. I used to read every Alex Cross book when they came out, and I haven't read like the last 3, I don't think. Stub McShave says that Peter Jackson, good combination of fan and filmmaker for Lord of the Rings. Absolutely. He absolutely was. Again, Peter Jackson's a real singular entity. I just think that like James Cameron, he's got a singular vision, great filmmaker. Frank Gradius says, hey, Rob, do you think the Star Blazers anime series would translate to the big screen? You would probably have enough material to do 4 movies at least. Well, we know how, first of all, Star Blazers, or as it's known in its native Japan, Space Battleship Yamato, or as we would say Yamato, but I've been told it's Yamato in Japan. Even they sing it, Yamato, in the theme song, which, by the way, is the best. They did in 2010. There was, of course, a live-action Star Blazers movie, a Space Battleship Yamato movie, which they really changed the gamelons. And here's my problem, and I've talked about this before. Space Battleship Yamato or Star Blazers is one of my favorite things. The modern versions of the 2 original stories that are still running now, Space Battleship 2199, which retells the Iskandar storyline, and the currently running, I think it's officially called Space Battleship Yamato 2202 Warriors of Love. I think that's the official title. with the Common Empire, retelling the Common Empire is insane. It's so good. They're so good. I love these shows so much. But Chris McQuarrie was involved in an American remake. They've been trying to remake Star Blazers for a long time. I have talked a lot about the fact that Asian culture is just different than American culture. And there is something inherent about Asian science fiction, specifically about their relationship with technology, robots, things like that. And Matsumoto Leiji, or we would say Leiji Matsumoto's work, whether it's in the Galaxy Express universe with Queen Emeraldis or Captain Harlock and Space Battleship Yamato, and the Galaxy Express universe, all of that, the idea of putting a train into space or a battleship into space, turning it into a spacefaring ship, I don't know if American audiences would buy it as much. I think that's one of the reasons. Like, I dearly love Pacific Rim in this country. I loved the latest Godzilla movie because it's bonkers fun. But there's a lot of people, it definitely does not sit well with the American fan. It's a lot, I think it's a lot harder. I mean, I think something like Robotech or Macross would work better as a translation into a film because, the SDF and also the Veritech fighters, the Valkyries, the idea that they're F-14 Tomcats that turn into robots, I think is more palatable. Or I don't know. I would love it to see a live-action American Star Blazers movie. I would love it, love it, love it, love it. I just don't know. It couldn't be the Yamato. They'd make it the Arizona. I just don't believe that Americans would dig a battleship being turned into a spacefaring vessel. I mean, that's a really rough thing to make Americans buy into, I think. Who knows, though? Let's see. Hapkido Lock just sent me a super chat. Thank you, Hapkido Lock. I appreciate that. But, again, I don't know. And the live-action Space Battleship Yamato movie proved, I mean, it would be a little hard to do Gamelons the way they're done because, they're like blue people. And it was tough. And they really changed the Gamelons a lot. Like, it was cool for me. It was cool for me seeing I love seeing the Yamato. It was so dope seeing it in space. I loved it live action and taking off. It was great. I loved all the characters. It was great seeing it all live action. However, I just don't think the movie with the Gamelons really it didn't work. I still like watching it. I own it. I mean, I bought a special edition Blu-ray from Japan, this big box set and everything. But yeah, I love that so much, though. Willow Yang says, I'm actually 27, but yes, Lord of the Rings is my Star Wars. I would imagine so. It would have to be. And I think Lord of the Rings as a trilogy ultimately is far more successful from an emotional and a storytelling standpoint than the first three Star Wars films because it's based on a book series. So the story was really laid out, whereas in Star Wars, they made it up as they went along. And I think from a storytelling standpoint, you can't do better than that. And that's why Lord of the Rings worked so well. And then you had Peter Jackson, who really, really knew what to do. Mark C is here. This is an interesting letter. I like this letter. Mark Chure is here. He is a longtime member of the Post Geek Singularity community. And I always like to say this because he pointed it out himself. Mark Chure said he is a toxic fan. He is a member of the Phantom Menace. But I would disagree. I would say that based on my interactions with Mark, at least through these letters, I don't think that Mark is necessarily a toxic fan. And I think, Mark wants to, I think he's using himself as a shining example of what the Fandom Menace can be. Although I think Mark is a shining example of what all fans can be, not just people in the Fandom Menace. So this is from Mark C. Afternoon, Rob and Imagination Connoisseurs. I would like to revisit the Superman topics from the other week. Love it. Topics like why I believe John Campea is absolutely wrong about Man of Steel, why comics are in trouble, and how that failure may have affected our society. But first, back to Superman. I don't hate Man of Steel. I'm crushed that we're losing Cavill just as he gets to display the Superman I think he should have always been. Watching Man of Steel and Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, Superman is being written in a way that you can hopefully relate to. A relatable Superman is someone a person like Campea can get into. The problem is it loses the entire reason for the characters to endure. For the majority of the character's creation, he is not a character to relate to. If you want that, try Gotham. Superman exists to be a hero to aspire to. At its core, it's where the messianic aspect of the character comes from. Sadly, at some point, that earnestness, that idea of being totally good, has become out of fashion, something to mock. We no longer aspire to be better. Man, I totally am with you right there. This has become a systemic problem for all superhero comics, and Star Trek, too. See, we need to be honest as to the purpose for these stories and why that comics have endured. Superhero stories were created as power fantasies for adolescent boys to cope with their insecurities. Female heroes weren't even designed for girls. They were designed as a roadmap for those boys to treat women with more respect and as equals to themselves. They were morality tales. While I believe it's great that more girls and women read, like Brie Larson said, about A Wrinkle in Time, they weren't made for you. You know who is good and who is evil. Right and wrong were clearly defined. Reading a superhero comic today, who's the hero? Who's the villain? Can often come down to a matter of perspective. The line between good and evil becomes blurred. But why? Why do we not aspire anymore? The answer? Our society has become lazy. Growing up, I, like everyone else, was taught and realized that we as human beings are flawed. What faith and my parents instilled in me was to recognize flaws as they appear and try and correct the flawed behavior. I see a world that pushes against faith and has turned our aspirational heroes into relatable ones. It's that to aspire and to inspire. It's that aspire and to inspire that's led us to become self-loathing and not striving to inspire. No longer do we push. Everyone wants to feel normal, so we see flaws in our heroes. If we no longer aspire to be better people, we learn to accept our flaws as part of us and don't grow. After a good 25 years of this, for some, their own perception of racism, sexism, and a lack of diversity is a way to regain a sense of being right without having to do the hard work of looking inward at oneself. It's much easier to point a finger at someone else. It instills righteousness without real personal growth. This is why there is such a pushback against depicting diversity in our entertainment. It's disingenuous. Our entertainment is using popular IPs to spread this disingenuous narrative by pointing fingers at fan bases where many have had this personal growth years ago. They seem so eager to show there's progress. They are creating bad product and divide what we have in culture today. It's cost those IPs and concepts and made them popular to begin with. How does this pertain to comics? Well, the idea of what a superhero is and who those stories are for has changed. Joe Quesada has said that comics have always reflected the values of the time. Many believe that superheroes are social justice warriors themselves. This progressive push is part of the medium. To all of this, I disagree. At their best, comics inspire their readers to become better than who they are by giving us characters to aspire to be like. Heroes don't fight for social justice, but rather moral justice on a basic right and wrong level. Much like religious faith, comics can help build a moral foundation for a reader to stand on as they navigate through the gray areas of life. You can't have a reader or person deal with social issues throughout their lives without first building a good basic moral foundation. But before any of this can work again, a lot of people need to get their heads out of their asses. And when they want to point a finger toward a problematic person, it needs to be in front of a mirror. Don't ask the world to change. Change yourself and be the inspiration that can change the world. Not with words, but with well thought out deeds. If it is truly earned, you won't have to announce it. The world will accept this change. Mark C. Well, Mr. Chure, I have to say, of all the letters you've written to me, I probably agree with this one the most. I agree with almost everything that you've said here. And I don't disagree. The only thing that you don't really address it here, but you talk about yes, comic book characters were originally created and conceived for young boys. They were. Certainly in the 30s when Siegel and Schuster were creating Superman, and of course Bill Finger and Bob Kane and all the artists and people that contributed to Batman. It was really that way. And by the way, while some girls read comics, it wasn't really, especially in fandom. I've watched the change. I've watched it occur. I've watched women come into fandom in droves because the material, the way females were presented in comics and movies and pulp novels and all of that, were quite frankly so directed at boys. It's a wonder that females would ever gravitate toward comics at all. But because we now live in the post-geek singularity, we started to have media and mediums where they had a much more female-friendly version or characters. And I saw it first. The first character that I remember seeing women actively go after was Death. Neil Gaiman's Death from the Sandman comics, introduced in issue 8, The Sound of Her Wings, I believe. I started seeing girls with death tattoos. And then after that, we had anime, whether it was Sailor Moon or other anime things that were coming in. And all through the late 80s and mostly in the 90s, and video games like the Mario series, Mario Kart. I mean, but just Mario at the beginning. Mario and Luigi and the princess, and Yoshi. It was Yoshi, right? Was it Yoshi? All of these characters were female friendly. They brought the female audience in. And while I always met women at conventions and things like that, it wasn't mainstream. And the mainstreaming of female fandom has happened. So I don't necessarily think I do think people have gotten lazy, and I do think people are taking the easy way out. We all want to be comfortable and nobody wants to have any hardship. That's why I am a firm believer in reinstating what I would call not necessarily the draft, but I think the United States could do really well for itself if there was mandatory social service from 18 to 20. I know that probably is not a very popular thing to say, but I think it would instill what is sorely needed in this country amongst young people. And I'd do it. If there was a new draft, I would absolutely go in it for 2 years. I would say, you know what? Even if you wanted to, as a middle-aged guy with one foot in the grave, if they had mandatory service, I'd even go military service. I'd love to go and do basic training, get in good shape, and who doesn't need extra discipline in their lives? But the problem is, I think, is that now that we have all different kinds of people, we have to be mindful of people who've gone through a lot of hardships anyway, and there's a lot of different kinds of people. And back in the 30s, America was a much more, I'm not even going to say less diverse, even though it was. It was, things were, like you said, more black and white. We were in the middle of a Great Depression. We came out of Prohibition, while the Roaring 20s, into the Depression era 30s, and life was very different back then. And but I think now, I think we are going through a period of time where we have become lazy and we've become complacent, and we have sort of forgotten our way. And we bicker and yell and scream. And again, it's part of the evolution of our social media landscape. It's going to change. Things are going to change because we are going to go through very real hardships, probably a lot faster. For anybody who wants to see what's coming down the pike, watch HBO's Years and Years. Russell T Davies. It's only 6 episodes, and it deals with a British family from 2019 to the mid-2030s. And talk about science fiction that is topical. My God. And I call it science fiction because, it's a look into the future, but nothing is nothing is unexpected, but it's happening right now. I literally was watching that show, and the stuff it was talking about, even for that will happen in 10 years from now, is happening. Literally, I would open up the news and be like, oh my God, this is happening right now. And the show just talked about it last night. It's crazy. But I think, look, Mark, I mean, we're living in a world where there's a lot of voices, a lot of people, a lot of things are happening. um, and we just have to be. We're now going through a period of oversensitivity, and everybody's vying to have a voice, and everybody's trying to be good and figure out what's happening, but that's going to be quickly as soon as calamities are going to change that, whether it's massive climate change, whether it's the bananas dying off. We're going to see a lot of things in the next 40 years. I hope I can live that long, so I'd love to see where we're going to be, but who knows. But great letter, and I want to thank you for writing that in. I think that was definitely a great letter. Hang on, I'm just going to do a little housekeeping here because I can. And yeah. Let's see. You know what? I think that I'm going to read this next. Hi, Rob. This one comes from James M. Hi, Rob. From time to time, you've talked about comic books on your show. So when I recently learned of a comic book that I'd never heard of, I just knew who to ask. That's right, you and the Post Geek Singularity. The comic book is a Star Trek crossover with the X-Men. I haven't had the opportunity to look into it yet, but I have a few questions about it. Do you know of this comic book? Is it good? And are there more crossovers between Star Trek and the X-Men than just this one? James M. Well, yes, James M. I own it. And by the way, there's not just a comic book crossover. There is a Star Trek novel crossover with Star Trek and the X-Men. And they both came out around the same period of time. And both the Next Generation and the original series were crossing over with the X-Men. And I think the novel is just the X-Men. I think it's Jan Michael Friedman, as a matter of fact. Let me consult. Let's see. And I'll tell you. But now, like, IDW is crossing Star Trek over with Planet of the Apes and the Green Lantern and the Green Lantern Corps and the Legion of Superheroes. And yeah, let's see. And but they were good. I liked them. Okay, so yeah, okay, here it is. Planet X. Yeah, it is by Michael Jan Friedman. So Planet X is the novel, and it's called X-Men Planet X. Star Trek The Next Generation, X-Men Planet X. It's from 1998. It's Michael Jan Friedman. It's a crossover between the X-Men comic book series and the characters of Star Trek The Next Generation. The novel is noteworthy for hinting at an attraction between Jean-Luc Picard and Storm. Woohoo! I like the book, and I own the book. I think it's a good book. And yeah, that was May 98. It was published. And yeah, I think that's pretty cool. And that was by Michael Jan Friedman. And yeah, the Marvel. Okay, so Marvel did Star Trek: The Next Generation and the X-Men. So they did that. And yeah, there's actually an article on it on StarTrek.com, which is interesting. The X-Men and the Enterprise crews have met on 3 different occasions, twice in single-issue comic book stories and once in a prose novel. Their adventures featured the Next Generation crew twice, and once featured characters from the original series. The stories feature all of the fan nods one would expect. Beast and Bones both answering to Nurse Chapel's call for Dr. Henry McCoy. The Borg assimilating the now infamous mutant hunting Sentinels, and respectful flirtations between Picard and Storm. So yeah, so there you go. Published in 96 and written by Scott Lobdell with a host of artists, Star Trek X-Men finds the X-Men boarding the USS Enterprise after pursuing the evil energy being Proteus across dimensions. Proteus entered the Star Trek universe to bond with the body of Lieutenant Commander Gary Mitchell, a Starfleet officer who was compromised by his psychic powers until Kirk used deadly force to stop him in the season 1 episode Where No One Has Gone Before. As its name suggests, 1998's Star Trek The Next Generation X-Men Second Contact, written by Dan Abnett and Ian Edginton, and illustrated by Corey Nord and Scott Koblish, takes place minutes after the film Star Trek First Contact. Traveling through time from the 24th century, the Enterprise is redirected by the Avengers villain Kang the Conqueror, who seeks control over new time streams by creating anomalies such as mutant James Proudstar serving on Deep Space Nine and Tasha Yar hunted by Sentinels in the Days of Future Past storyline. So there you go. There's been 2 comic crossovers and a novel. So how cool is that? What a great letter. I have them now. I'm going to have to go dig them out. I like that. So there you go. That's fantastic. Love that. And let's see if anybody else has to say anything. I got to jump off soon because I've got work. But I think I can read like one more letter, because why not? Let's see what people are saying. Well, you know what? Here's another letter, and this one comes from Jason Manweiler. Greetings, Rob. First, I should start off by saying congratulations on 200. I know you're over the mark now, but I miss getting a letter in for the 200th. I had a very different letter ready to send you today, but the recent news of my topic has made me very irate. I was finally going to be sending you the letter I promised on the Disney live-action films and what the studio needs to be doing. However, the recent news about Spider-Man involving Sony and Disney Marvel is something I need to address. I normally try and keep my letters somewhat clean because I'm respectful of the fact that kids may be watching, and also as a YouTuber myself, I know those analytics are a bitch. However, I don't think I can hold back on this one, my man. Let me cut right to the chase here, good sir. This is some bullshit. I do not understand what Sony could possibly be thinking. This is absolutely ridiculous. I understand the business aspect, and Disney is just as greedy as Sony, no doubt about it. But where would Sony be without the Marvel Cinematic Universe? They agreed to have our Lord and Savior Kevin Feige handle this amazing character and do him justice after Sony screwed the pooch with the Amazing Spider-Man films. The product of Spider-Man we got from the MCU is the best it's ever been. That's because of the vision of Kevin Feige and the casting of Tom Holland. Tom Holland is Spider-Man. He is Peter Parker. I understand some people may not like the mentor-mentee relationship he had with Tony Stark, but I did. I do not need to see Uncle Ben ever again. To me, this situation screams that Sony is overconfident in their ability to make solid quality Spider-Man movies when we know that not to be the case. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is incredible, no doubt about it. But let's be real here. The success of Venom was a goddamn fluke. Sony needed help to save not only Spider-Man, but their studio. So if you ask me, if Disney wants 50%, you give it to them. Yes, Spider-Man Far From Home is your highest grossing film ever, but you want to know why? Because it was attached to the Marvel Cinematic Universe and was the highest grossing film of all time, Avengers Endgame. You had nothing to do with that. That was all Kevin Feige and the MCU. Sony is proving they have no clue what they're doing, and they're biting their nose despite their fates. I'm aware that I sound like a raging fanboy, and I honestly do not care. Spider-Man is my favorite Marvel character, and I know that we have him right. And now that we have him right, I want it to stay that way. I do not like the Mark Webb films, and going to be controversial here, I don't really care for the Raimi films either. Toby is too old, and he doesn't feel like Peter or Spider-Man to me, but that's neither here nor there. I sign off all my letters with your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man for a reason. I love Spider-Man. If this really happens, then how does Sony and the MCU move forward with storytelling? It almost makes Peter's time in the MCU worthless. That's right. It pisses me off to no end because Tom Holland and Peter Parker have been a great addition to the MCU. Talk me off this ledge, Rob. Am I crazy for thinking Sony needs to shut up and give Disney what they want because Disney has given him the recent success and saved Spider-Man? As always, your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, well, Jason Manweiler. Well, Jason, we've been talking about this all day. I feel your pain, son. I do. However, as I stated, I think Sony is in the right here after reconsidering my first initial opinion that was the same as yours. But again, I don't know what's going to happen. I think they're going to ultimately realize cooler heads will prevail because I think the Spider-Man as it's been positioned, I think it's an insurmountable storytelling impediment that Spider-Man's been part of the MCU in 5 movies now so far. And how do you go back and do you retcon that? Do you pretend how do you pretend there are no Avengers in Spider-Man's world? I don't know. I honestly don't know. If Spider-Man's secret identity has been blown, as we saw, unless that's not just another Mysterio illusion, if Spider-Man's secret identity has in fact been blown, wouldn't the first place he would run to for protection is Avengers headquarters? That's where I'd go. Me and Aunt May would pack up and head over there. If I was doxxed like that on an international scale, especially after just saving London. Very interesting. I don't know how they're going to go forward and do that, but I'm right there with you. I think, absolutely, that you did. You bring up many good points, but again, who knows what's going to happen? Maybe we'll get it back. I don't know. You know, there's a lot of letters. There's a lot of letters people have been sending me in that go all the way back to, my God, letters that I've talked about reading since all the way back to October 13th. I'm going to jump back there. I'm going to jump back to October 13th. Here's a letter that I haven't been reading, but it's an evergreen letter, and I love it. It comes from Liam Kerrigan all the way in Japan. Hi, Rob. Once again from Nagano, Japan, and for once, I'm not going to talk about Superman. Oops, I guess I just did. Anyway, on to today's topic. I saw on social media the other day that it was the 32nd anniversary of the release of Masters of the Universe, and discussion soon moved into the long overdue reboot that seems to have been in development hell for more than a decade. It got me thinking about another movie from the 80s that I think is long overdue for a reboot. That movie is Highlander. Okay, as a Scotsman, I'm probably a bit biased in my view, but I unashamedly love this movie. The sequel was an absolute abomination, but I really enjoyed the TV series too. It was sometimes formulaic, but perhaps for the same reasons I love old Superman movies, the simple idea of a hero who faces a challenge, empowers himself, and takes down the big bad at the end worked for me as a means of escapism from what were very difficult times in my life back in my teenage years in the 1990s. Plus, it gave us some brilliantly charismatic theatrical villains. And I believe that the world as it is today is primed for a Highlander reboot. When you have characters who can potentially live forever and lore that spans thousands of years, the story possibilities are almost limitless. And who doesn't love a good sword fight? Highlander has that thing that Hollywood keeps looking for but seldom finds these days, a premise that's simple enough for the audience to easily get into. You're immortal, but get your head cut off and it's game over. But at the same time, the premise allows for great depth and expansion of the franchise into multiple sequels, spin-offs, and other media, if done correctly. Yes, I can already hear the groans of some people saying, damn it, not another reboot. But let's face it, TV shows and movies could learn a lot from Highlander. I remember watching UK TV soap operas with my mother, and she wasn't too happy when I said her beloved shows would be more interesting if they followed the Highlander TV series model and decapitated a major character at the end of every episode. Is that why you moved to Japan? Samurai Justice, Tokugawa Shogunate Justice. Joking aside, I think Highlander is ripe for a revisiting. It has a hero who is positive, but also does have a darker edge that would appeal to those who insist on everything being edgy and gloomy these days. Done right, Highlander could prove a hit, not just with nostalgia lovers like me, but also find a whole new audience with younger generations too. What do you think, Rob? Is it time for the Clan MacLeod to return? If so, would you rather see a movie or a TV series? As always, thanks for everything you do and keep up the good work. Liam Kerrigan. Well, Liam, let me tell you. First of all, I love the fact you live in Japan, and you and Lynn Hobday should hang out, because I think everybody who lives in Japan that watches this show should hang out, and I think Lynn would be really fun to hang out with. I'd love to meet her. But yeah, so look her up. But anyway, I would love to see a new Highlander movie. I love Russell Mulcahy's first Highlander. I saw it in the theater opening weekend. I loved everything about it. I love the cool MTV transitions from the past to the present. Christopher Lambert, he was great. I really enjoyed it. Sean Connery, come on. Ramirez, Clancy Brown is the Kurgan Queen. Yeah, I don't understand the second one at all. I've watched all the different. How many different cuts of Highlander 2 have there been? The bootleg cut. I don't know. There's something about Highlander 2 though. There's something really. I don't know, but I love Highlander, and yeah, I mean the TV. Adrian Paul, right? It was Adrian Paul who started the TV series. I liked it. I thought the TV series was pretty good, and why not bring that back? I love that premise, and like you said, would you reboot it? You'd have to do it from scratch. I don't know. Would you retell it or do the Ramirez thing all over again? I don't know. Interesting. Not a bad idea, Liam, and I'm with you there. Absolutely. With you there. Then again, it could suck. So you never know. You never know. I don't know. I hope it wouldn't, but it could be cool. I'd like to see that. Because why not? I mean, as long as it's good. As long as it's good. Let's see. Hassan Chavez says, would you stay in San Junipero? What period? Okay. Here's a great question. Hassan Chavez is asking, would I stay in San Junipero. This is a question about Black Mirror. San Junipero being one of the greatest episodes of the show. You know, I don't want to get into the specifics of it, but San Junipero is a virtual world. I guess we could call it a virtual world. And I'd probably live in the 80s if I could go back to San Junipero, just because I love the music and I was a child of the 80s and I had a lot of fun in the 80s. My time in high school and college and moving to California, I would say from you know what? Most of the 80s are pretty good to me. The 80s are pretty good to me. So if I was going to go back to and if I could look the way I looked in the 80s, I was pretty back then. I would say that if I was going to live in San Junipero. By the way, if you guys don't watch Black Mirror, you should. I love Black Mirror. San Junipero is definitely one of the greatest episodes of Black Mirror. It's fantastic, and I couldn't say enough about that. So San Junipero, yes, the 80s. The 80s would be my jam. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to bring this chat to a close. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank my moderators, whether it's Detective Jim, whether it's Greg Smith, whether it's, of course, the Honorable Mayor Mike Bodden of Riverdale, Iowa. I want to thank my mods for being here. I want to thank you, Imagination Connoisseurs, from the Post-Geek Singularity community. I think you're great. Thank you very much. Please keep those letters coming. It's great. There's so many interesting topics to cover. We live in interesting times, my friends. You just never know. One day you wake up, you think it's going to be a normal day. Suddenly, Spider-Man's out of the MCU, and my God, Neo's coming back. Unbelievable. They're making The Matrix 4. Crazy times, but good times. It's, all in all, we're getting the stuff that we're arguing over. The Post-Geek Singularity is given just amazing stuff on a daily basis. We should cherish it all. I just look at this. I got Thanos down here, the Hot Toys. I really need to put my backing and light these up so you can see. And I keep moving things around. I keep changing things and moving things, and you can't even see like War Machine and Deadpool and Iron Spider and whatever. You got to be able to see this stuff. So anyway, I want to thank you all for being here. I want to remind all of you, these chats are brought to you by Lucky Tiger Men's Grooming Products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And if you go to their website at getluckytiger.com, and all of you should, if you buy anything, when you check out, punch in PGS to get 20% off your order. And they are having their Tailgaters giveaway. It's free. You don't even have to be a guy. You can be a girl too. You can go to their website, either getluckytiger.com or clubluckytiger.com, and you can enter their giveaway for perhaps $500 worth of tailgating stuff for the upcoming football season. Go Hawks. Seahawks, that is. I want to thank everybody for writing in. I want to thank all of you for supporting the channel, both at the website and here when we're live. It's fantastic. I am not back on the John Campea show tomorrow. It is Thursday and Friday, so I will not be on the John Campea show until Monday. I will be here, however. And so keep sending in the letters and all of that. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And with that, I say to everyone, have a better day.